There are so many interesting little details about the nature of Commander Lord Kruge's Bird of Prey in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock when it first appears on screen. These little details will change your thinking about this ship, about the nature of Kruge's attack, and how his ship becomes one of the most iconic ships in the Star Trek universe and still makes appearances decades later. So let's break down Kruge's attack on both the Grissom and the Enterprise with a tactical analysis, and then let's reveal a number of details that will certainly prompt hopefully a lot of delightfully geeky comments in the comments section. But before we get on to that, I thought I'd just go ahead and plug my Patreon page at patreon.com/resurrected. I typically love making starship renders. I have a list of assets that new subscribers to Patreon can choose from at different levels. So if they want a custom render, they can hit me up on Patreon after they subscribe. And I try to keep this pretty up to date with new starship assets coming out there. And also you can download a lot of the 3D models directly for yourself if you like by becoming a subscriber on Patreon. Also, if you want to just buy some of my models, you can find them at cgtrader/lost starships, which will be linked in the description below. And also, if you don't like Patreon, feel free to just support me with a super thanks comment, and that'll be perfectly great. Or just comment at all, and that helps with the algorithm. Okay, let's get back to this Bird of Prey analysis. So let's briefly touch on this ship's design. The design itself was requested as a bird-like ship by Leonard Nimoy, who was directing Star Trek III, and he wanted long, outstretched wings. It also has the appearance of kind of a bodybuilder doing a downward flexing pose. The wings change position, slightly horizontal for just cruising around, but in an attack position, the wings fold downwards. This gives the ship a more intimidating appearance. There are bulky looking cannons on each wingtip, and the ship has a torpedo tube in its forward section. On the back is a massive engine thruster, which may be the impulse engines, but there are no definable warp nacelles as we normally see them on Star Trek ships. The ship must be generating its warp field through another means, perhaps the wings. The ship is capable of landing and flying easily in a planet's atmosphere. Alright, now let's review the combat for this ship in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, starting with Kruge's attack on the Gagarin class science vessel USS Grissom. Kruge is able to position his ship on Grissom's stern and decloak. He's not really in a big hurry at this point, and even takes the time after decloaking to tell the gunner to target the Grissom's engines. The Bird of Prey fires a green weapon from its torpedo tube. The appearance of this torpedo could be very important, which I'll talk about later. And then, oops, so sorry, the ship accidentally is completely annihilated. And then Kruge promptly executes the gunner. So while yes, this could have been purely incidental where the warp core of the Grissom was breached, causing the utter annihilation of the ship, still, either the Gagarin class starships are very weak, or the Klingons are firing a torpedo that is a bit more powerful than you might think. This might be important. But now on to the next anticipated encounter. When the Enterprise arrives at the Genesis planet, the Bird of Prey is able to detect the Enterprise first, just in time to engage its cloak before being identified, and Kruge's little dog approves. Just as Chekhov swears there was something there for an instant, a scout-class vessel. So you see, the Klingons were able to identify the nature of the Enterprise far before the Enterprise identifies them. They call it a Federation battlecruiser. So this leads me to believe that Kruge's ship actually has relatively sophisticated sensors. Kruge is beamed up, and here we get the nature of the attack. The Enterprise is the one moving on approach at this point toward the general position of where Chekhov scanned the scout-class vessel before it disappeared. Kruge also orders to proceed on impulse power. He clearly wants to get some better positioning, perhaps to line up the best possible shot. This part here is a lot like World War II submarine tactics. A submarine would position itself so that the target vessel would maneuver across its best firing position. But there is a big problem for the Klingons with this little bit of maneuvering. Although Chekhov's scans are revealing nothing, The movement of the Bird of Prey creates a visual distortion in space that Kirk and Sulu spot. Kirk orders power diverted to weapons only, but not shields. I believe his reasoning is that he doesn't want to tip the Klingons off by blooming up their heat signature in a way that raising the shields would make this extremely obvious. No doubt the Klingons would then change their tactics. Kirk is counting on firing whatever they can as soon as the target reveals itself. Kruge orders to stand by to divert all power to weapons. The cloaking device saps up a lot of power, so after they decloak, it will take some seconds to divert that power to weapons and take their shot. Finally, the Enterprise reaches firing range. Kruge is counting on two things. One, that they have taken the Enterprise by surprise, and two, that he can hit the engines before the Enterprise can charge its phasers and photon torpedoes to retaliate. This might cripple the Enterprise enough for the Klingons to gain tactical superiority. And finally, the Klingons decloak and begin arming torpedoes. Sulu reports the ship as a Klingon Bird of Prey. The Enterprise fires 2 photon torpedoes from the port torpedo tube, and they make a direct hit on the Klingons, causing one hell of a light show. But they don't destroy the ship outright, which is odd, as photon torpedoes are normally devastating, especially to ships without shields, so we will circle back to that. The Enterprise attempts to raise shields, but the shields only seem to partially raise. Scotty's automation system is overloaded. Remember, only the 4 of them are running the entire ship since Kirk had to steal the Enterprise for his mission to save Spock. The complexity of combat overloads the automation system. Meanwhile, Kruge's ship is kind of spinning out of position. He orders emergency power to thrusters to regain control, and is able to fire a torpedo at the Enterprise, which seems to impact near the port side nacelle. It seems that the partially raised shields may have protected the Enterprise from having the nacelle blown clean off, but the automation system is fried, and the crew has no control over any systems. Before firing again, Kruge senses that something's off. He seems to be well aware that the Enterprise should have been able to tank his torpedo shot, with the shields up at least, and then respond with phasers. He vocalizes this by saying they outgun him 10-1. And so begins Kirk's attempt to bluff, to convince Kruge that he can destroy the Klingon ship, but Kruge is clever enough to see through it. After all, it would make sense, given the Enterprise's tactical superiority, that they would have at least followed up by severely damaging the Bird of Prey. And of course, this leads to Kruge trying to board the Enterprise self-destructing, and you know the rest. If not, you should go watch the movie. So with all this considered, let's go back a bit to the first detail I noted during the attack on the Grissom. The Bird of Prey fires a green, not red, not blue, torpedo-like weapon from the torpedo tube, and the weapon seems to be powerful enough to devastate the Grissom. This is clearly a very different kind of weapon than that seen used by other Klingon ships in this era, which are the brilliant red photon torpedoes. While it is true that this could still be a photon torpedo, here's another possibility, that this is actually a plasma weapon. Yes, very much like the plasma torpedoes the Romulans might use in this era, which has a lot of power at closer ranges, possibly even quite a bit more than a photon torpedo, but gradually dissipates at longer ranges. Also, although the weapon does not destroy the Enterprise, it hits pretty hard, and it also took some time to charge, which is interesting. And here's another interesting question. Why didn't the Enterprise severely damage the Bird of Prey with 2 direct photon torpedo impacts? Well, one possibility is that these photon torpedoes did not actually have time to charge to their full yield. We learned in later Star Trek that photon torpedoes are actually a matter-antimatter warhead. They would be volatile if constantly in an armed state, so it takes time to inject the antimatter and contain it properly before firing. Perhaps there was not enough time to get them fully armed before the Klingons decloaked. Another possibility is that the Klingons did in fact partially charge their shields somehow, even though Kruge wanted all power diverted to weapons. A shield impact would explain this brilliant light show here. Kruge also made a couple of major tactical errors. For one, he maneuvers his ship while the Enterprise is close. Okay, so what's the problem there? Well, it's simple. A moving ship is much easier to detect. For two, Kruge seems to have attacked the Enterprise head-on. While it's true his positioning was sufficient enough to attack the warp nacelle, most of the refit Constitution's weapons are on the front. An attack from astern or the side may have been far more effective. I can also make another conclusion about this particular Klingon ship from this. Its cloak is kind of, well, it's not that great. Like, maybe it's an early version. And also, Kruge is not as combat experienced as he should be in this kind of ship. If he were, he would have been far more careful and patient, and then positioned himself to let the Enterprise come to them while sitting perfectly still, which would make the Klingons much harder to detect. With more patience, he would realize that eventually the Grissom's debris would be discovered by the Enterprise. He could have used that debris as bait and remained cloaked and perfectly still, undetectable near the debris, and waited for the Enterprise to approach. It is clear that although Kruge is highly intelligent, his use of this particular ship in a moving head-on attack is wrong. It's far too, well, Klingon. One final thing, look at the bridge of this Klingon ship. It looks nothing like any Klingon bridge other than the readouts. Especially the door. This door is an elegant arch, isn't it? Not very Klingon. I think a species like, I don't know, the Vulcans would make a door kind of like this. And you know why? Because the Klingon Bird of Prey is in fact not a Klingon ship at all. Uber Star Trek nerds know that this is in fact a Romulan ship through and through. Now it is true that Sulu identifies this as a Klingon Bird of Prey right away. Maybe it's the paint scheme, but I doubt it. Maybe it's the Mutara sector's proximity to Klingon space. Or more likely, as Sulu is no slouch at all when it comes to starship combat tactics, he knows that this Bird of Prey is not acting very Romulan at all. It is well known in Star Trek lore that in this era, the Klingons and Romulans did have a short-lived alliance and traded technology, and even entire ships at one point. One may try to argue that this is one of the brand new Romulan-inspired B'rel Class birds of prey right off the Klingon assembly line. It has one of the new copies of the Romulan cloaking devices. Only, in the end, this cloak is not very effective, is it? And also, just look at this ship. It literally has chipped paint and rust on it. This ship is not a new Klingon ship. This ship is an old Romulan ship, perhaps decades old, and perhaps its design is even heavily influenced by the Klingon-Romulan tech trade in earlier years, but it's still clearly an old ship. And also, I don't believe that this ship design is meant for taking on large warships head-on. The Klingon Bird of Prey, or in this case, this movie-era Romulan Bird of Prey, like many cloaky ships in Star Trek, is in essence a submarine in space. And you know what submarines can do very effectively? They can raid commerce and strike a terrible blow to the enemy economy. While they can attack warships, they would rarely if ever do so, especially head-on. This is something that the Romulan psychology allows for, but the Klingons, perhaps much like the Japanese in World War II, would see commerce raiding as mostly dishonorable and beneath them. Kruge's mistake may be also due to another possible cause, and that is that Kruge wanted to die. He was seeking a glorious death, and who knows why. Maybe he has a dead-end career, maybe there's problems at home, but he wanted to do or die in this situation. And the final reason this ship is not Klingon is because the original Harve Bennett script says so. They literally designed a Romulan ship with Romulan technology and a Romulan interior. Only later they would put Klingons in there, as Leonard Nimoy wanted, for more theatrical villains. And they left the ship just as it was, because this ship is one of the most freaking cool spaceships in all of sci-fi, which I'm okay with. I have in fact accepted that the Klingons would adopt this Romulan ship design as their own, so later Klingon Birds of Prey would not be coming right out of the Romulan fleet mothball storage, but manufactured by the Klingons themselves, and would go on to use these ships for decades to come. Now, more than likely, the Romulans had a number of these relatively older ships parked somewhere, probably on a planet's surface judging by the wear and tear of the paint, and they traded several of these old ships to the Klingons. And Kruge's ship is one of those original, older Romulan hand-me-downs. Nevertheless, whether it's Klingon or Romulan, It's a fascinating design, and I look forward to doing more breakdown videos that involve these ships in the future. Please say in the comments what you think of this ship, its origins, its later use, and what other videos you might like to see about these ships later on. Be sure to comment, subscribe, and like. And I don't do this enough, but here's a special thanks to my Patreons at patreon.com/resurrected. Until next time, space friends.